Hey there, audio level sounds good. Yeah, buddy.
That's why.
Okay, hello everybody. How are you? Happy Friday to everybody. First of all, how many people in here are, well, first of all, everybody, if you would, mute your cell phones and everything else that you have, or put them on vibrate or something so those don't go off if you can. We don't want to hear your aha ringtone or anything going off. How many people in here are non-FIANs? That is somebody who has not currently or in the past gone to FIA. Fantastic. All right, so are you guys from, I know there's a game design class that was some people that were going to come, so that's what you guys are from? Awesome, well thank you guys for coming out, we appreciate it. Couple of things, if you are interested in learning more about FIA, you wonder what this FIA thing is, how you say the word FIA properly, you know, is Ron Weaver as amazing and evil as you hear? Or are those just, did he once actually kill a man for snoring? You can get those kind of answers from either Sarah or I. We'll be happy to, or unless Ron, do you want to answer that question? Did you actually kill a man for snoring?
Kill a man for snoring?
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about that.
He's no longer snoring.
Right. That is a good point. That's a very good point. You can see Sarah or I. We'll be happy to take you on a tour of the building if you haven't been through or just learn more about the program. We certainly appreciate you coming out. What other rules of the road? Does any faculty or staff have anything that they want to announce or let us know while we're all gathered here? Okay, doesn't look like it. First of all, thanks for coming out. Thanks, Sarah. That's very good. Thanks for coming out. We're really looking forward to have Chris Darin here. We feel fortunate to have him. Chris was a Cohort 7, a graduate of Cohort 7. He was the project lead on a game called Scarfell, which was a really amazing, I thought, immersive, interesting project here at FIA. And then he went off and got a job at Blizzard. So his talk is called Blizzard from the Inside Out. So he's going to give us hopefully a little inside scoop on what that company's like, what his job is. I think he is the only person in the company that has the job of UX prototyper, so we're going to find out hopefully more about what that is and what he does. So if there's nothing else, let's give a big round of applause for Chris.
Two things to go before the talk starts. As far as remembering how to pronounce fire, just an easy mnemonic is the roof is on fire. Any other pronunciation does not work.
Very good.
Second point, little disclaimer. Sorry, but I have to. So I'm not here officially representing Blizzard. I'm just an individual employee describing his experience leading up to and during his time at the company. I'm going to be happy to answer questions during and after the presentation, but please keep in mind that my answers are going to be limited by what I can reasonably share. Blizzard tends to be pretty tight-lipped about company things, and I do want to respect that. I'm going to present for a bit, and then I want to turn things over to an open dialogue format because I want to make sure I have time to answer any questions you guys might have. Sorry for being rude, so let's start back and say, hello, my name is Chris Darin, and I work for an indie studio known as Blizzard Entertainment. Wrong, sorry. You laugh, but funny thing is, in our press release after news broke out that Blizzard had essentially bought itself back from Vivendi, our CEO Mike Morheim actually referred to Blizzard as the world's largest independent game developer. Who knew? Maybe not necessarily the indie spirit or what we mean by the current state of the industry, but it is independent. So when thinking about Blizzard, it's possible that something like this comes into your mind. This fits, for example, the poster that was sent out, something very epic. Maybe you've played Blizzard games and you've been captivated by the awesome, engaging experience, etc. I'm not here to sell you about the company, but this may be one of the ways that you might approach the company when you think about it. It's also possible that you're in a different camp and you have that kind of like mixed awareness of the company for its games and the company as a company. And so you might follow stuff like BlizzCon or all the Kotaku articles that are written about like literally everything that happens, including, but not limited to, our Halloween costume contest, where a dude dressed up as Khal Drogo, and that like was worth like 5 Kotaku articles. It's also possible that you think of Blizzard like this. Maybe you haven't really played the game so much, but just by sheer cultural relevance, you've run into Blizzard things from time to time, parodies and so on. Another disclaimer, and related, I haven't watched Star Wars, but I can pretty much describe the entire plot of Star Wars to you just by the number of other things that have referenced it. If you think about Blizzard in any of these 3 ways, my goal for this talk is to make you think of Blizzard like this. That says Blizzard way. This is a true story. Pics, it did happen. This, like, right here is actually like a drive, one of the drives that goes into the company. And there's like a crosswalk there that numerous people have been like hit at while trying to cross because it wasn't a real crosswalk for a long time. So the city of Irvine actually wanted to make it a street so they could justify putting up, one of those like nice little like you can walk now sign things. And so to make it a street, they had to put up a street sign, and shit you not, Blizzard Way was what they put up. They did actually fix it within a few hours, and the really weird and funny thing is that like there's a giant Blizzard logo sign like right next to this thing. So like while they're putting it up, you have to imagine that at least one of the people is like, ah shit. I mean, this is just my job, but I am not responsible for this, right? I'd also like for you to think of Blizzard like this. Sorry guys. As content creators, there really isn't any room for heroes, Blizzard is a company, and it makes mistakes, and tons of mistakes, and it covers them up over time. It does fix them. Some of them are within its control, some of them are out of its control, others, like this one, completely spiral. This, by the way, is a great lesson in having better error messaging. Seriously, like writing error messages is probably the most boring thing you can do for a product, but perhaps one of the most important, because this literally means that our login server is not able to handle the volume of traffic that it's getting at the time. But because this doesn't tell you anything about that, what you do when you see this is you click OK and you try to log in again. Guess what that does? Makes it way worse. I'd also like to get you to think of the company like this. This is the break room for the floor that I'm on. At any given, this is just like a snapshot in time. It's kind of like a constant feud where like people put up sticky notes or just things related to just whatever. This actually happened because the water machine was broken and someone was like, this makes me really sad. And the facilities wrote a sticky that was like, please stop putting stickies up. And then actually there's this sticky right here that requests facilities to file their complaints about stickies with the appropriate department. I'd also like you to think of the company like this. This was an ice cream social. That giant mug was once filled with root beer. It was amazing, and there were no survivors. You know, when you work there, anything that you do is going to become mundane and routine. And things can still be awesome, like you can still have an awesome mundane routine, but it is still an awesome mundane routine. On this day, when there was an ice cream social, the most interesting thing in my life was that I was drinking a root beer float, not that I was working at Blizzard, right? But that is really important and relevant, because when you're on the other side of it, I mean, that is what your life becomes. And one of the best ways to get yourself to the other side, to get into a company, is to stop thinking about it as an outsider and to start thinking about it as, you know, as a potential insider, essentially. And that's ultimately the you that you want to sell. So I've been at Blizzard for what will be 2 years in September. Rick pointed out that that's technically more like a year and a half, but I don't like updating the math in my head all the time because the time really flies. I'm a UX prototyper. And as Todd said, I'm actually the first and only of my kind at the company, which I'll get into later. Don't read these slides. This actually, the point of this is, so UX stands for user experience, and there are seriously hundreds of ways that people try to describe exactly what that means. All of these graphs are on sites that are like, guys, I figured it out, this is UX. And then they like put up some kind of diagram or chart like this. But if you actually read the text in all of them, they all contradict each other. I mean, this one is about like, you know, ease of use, easy to learn, efficiency. But if you go over here, this is like branding, right? I mean, they seem almost incompatible. User experience is kind of a fuzzy thing. But the easiest way to boil that down is that it's a psychological state a user goes through while using a product. It is not UI. That is super important because I swear to God, if you write UI/UX as a skill on your resume, that is serious negative points. It suggests that you don't recognize that these are two very different fields that actually compete with each other because a UI artist wants things to look pretty and wants interactions to go smooth. The user experience designer wants you to feel good while you're doing it. UX in some ways is kind of cross-cutting. It fits into a lot of other disciplines, but ultimately it's concerned with the psychological state of the user, all else be damned. The first time you download something in Xbox Live and then realize that the screen where you watch downloads finish is not the same one where you interact with your files, so then you're left with a crappy message telling you to navigate to another folder, but it doesn't give you a frickin' button to go to where you need to actually see the trailer or whatever you download. That orchestra of frustration is user experience. User experience design means using a suite of tools and information to evoke the right feelings at the right time when a user engages with your product. UX prototyping is one tool in that bag, making a facsimile of the experience so that you can figure out the nitty-gritty of how you want it to all piece together. A little anecdote of user experience, because this is really important. Remember, user experience is about the psychological state. So one other tool in that bag is doing user research, where we actually bring people in and we let them engage with a product or a prototype of a product or something, and we both get feedback, we do eye tracking, pretty much like the standard run-of-the-mill stuff that you would do for user research when you're in the industry. So this one time, we had people brought in to try out some of the new Diablo 3 expansion content, right? Because they were changing how, fundamentally how you're navigating through the game. You no longer have to go through the story mode in order to level up and grind all the content, right? Cool. So one little feature that they added was this map that you could open up and it would tell you where you needed to go, and you could click on places and it would teleport you there. Funny thing though, when we did user research on this, people who had come to this Diablo game, or had come to start playing Diablo from a World of Warcraft background, when they opened up the map, They would look at it, they'd be like, oh, that's where I need to go. They would close the map and they would start walking there. It makes sense, right? I mean, if that is your experience for games, that's the first way that you're going to approach it. If you never hover your mouse over a button, you're not going to see that it's like glowing and you can actually interact with it. All that said, I'm not here specifically to talk about user experience. If that does interest you, I highly recommend you bring it up in the open discussion at the end. Let me draw your attention to something else. Something that may seem mundane or not as exciting as a poster with Illidan on it that announces talk. I want to talk about something that, in my opinion, is far more important, especially for you and from the perspective that you're coming from. This may end up not being the talk you wanted, but I hope that it's a talk you need. If I had to give this talk another name, this would be it. The importance of culture. Because if there's a secret sauce to what Blizzard does, it's culture. And taking a really long time, of course, but mostly culture. Culture is comprised of many in a group, but starts with the individual. Each of us has a wealth of experiences behind us. Successes, failures, and tons of things that can't be categorized as either. For example, inside jokes, or people who were super important to your life at one point, but who you don't even talk to or think about anymore. When we interact with each other, we don't end up brushing directly with that wealth of experience beneath us, but indirectly we're always interacting with it because it's a backdrop to everything else about us. Culture is important. It's a main factor in my being hired. It's also the secret to how Blizzard does so well. Culture persuades how you act and decide when not being told explicitly what to do, by implicitly suggesting what does and doesn't belong. Culture aligns many. Culture is a reminder that you fit in. Culture is what makes home, home. You have to understand, after the unpredicted success of World of Warcraft, Blizzard has been in a constant state of expansion. Pun very much intended. But having a bunch of money, being able to fund more games and hire many more people sounds great, but it also poses a huge problem. Since cultures are negotiated by many individuals, the more people you add, the higher your chance of diluting or confusing the values that brought all those people together in the first place. And relying on your senior team members to train up all the new guys is problematic because they have work to be doing. And you also don't want to create a split culture of the original old guard Blizzard team members versus like the new crowd, right? But somehow the company has managed to pull this off. I even have evidence. Besides the games, that is. Blizzard has anniversary rewards that are tiered based on how long you've been at the company. At 2 years, which I'll be reaching soon, you'll be getting a Stein. Big ass, awesome Stein. At 5 years, you get a badass sword. At 10 years, you get an equally badass shield. And at 20 years, you get a pretty killer crown. We used to give out swords in a 1-by-1 fashion as part of other company events. The ceremony was called the Circle of Honor. But now we have so many swords to give out each year. And keep in mind, these are 5-year employees. We have so many swords to give out each year that instead they had to divide the Circle of Honor ceremony by team. And the crowns, they're given out at the holiday parties once a year. And while I don't have exact numbers on how many crowns they gave out this past year, because it was an open bar and I was drinking, I can say that the ceremony for them took well over an hour, which I noted. People stay at Blizzard for a long time. Not everyone, but many do. Keep in mind though, the rewards themselves aren't that meaningful. They're cool and all, but if I wanted a cool sword, I could just click on any number of banner ads on the internet and just buy one. The reason it's meaningful is the same reason that pinging one of your pieces in checkers is meaningful. A group of people have agreed on a symbolic value for something, and within the rules for how to achieve that value, you succeeded. And it feels good. People who receive swords don't take their swords home. They get them mounted, which is, of course, a free service that the company does. It makes sense. You see them mounted on the walls everywhere, all over the office, because they're a badge of honor. As I said, culture is important. So how do you establish culture? Well, it starts like this. Let me draw your attention to this awesome statue. That's the actual central main Blizzard building in the back there. You'll get another view of the campus later on in the talk. But the important thing right now is this statue. You can see right here, there's actually this little plaque. And there's this ring that looks decorative that circles it. This is a close-up of the plaque. This is our company motto. Dedicated to creating the most epic entertainment experiences, ... ever. I assumed that they wanted to capitalize ever, but then realized that lowercase looks really weird in a plaque. Either way, there's an ellipsis there. The ring itself, this guy, these little plaques actually mark the core values of the company, which, let me preface by saying, is going to sound a little hokey, but this is super serial, guys. The first one is gameplay first. They say that they're not ordered in any specific arrangement, but I kind of feel that they are. Gameplay first kind of makes sense. You're making games. You really care about, you know, what that experience is. You know the product that you're making and what people are expecting from you. Gameplay first isn't so much a reductive truth to tell you how to decide in a situation, so much as something to always keep yourself centered on. Because sometimes you gotta put other things in front of gameplay. Sometimes you just need it. Commit to quality. This actually may be the most important one. There's a saying at Blizzard that they tell you at your orientation, no one remembers if it's late, but they do remember if it's great. Makes sense that they developed that as a motto. Commit to quality is a perfect example of like the exact value that these values have. Sort of redundant. The point of the values is not so much to make you feel good about working at the company. It's actually to arm the employees and to center everyone around a set of sort of rules, similar to the rules of checkers, the things that define success at the company. They're actually arming you with weapons, because when you're at a meeting and you're having a discussion like, man, we could go route A, it's going to take a long time, it's a little bit risky. We can go route B, it's a little bit safer, it's going to be shorter. That's a perfect time to say, hey, commit to quality. Let's actually do this. Let's stick to our guns. This happens all the time. I hear these all the time. Because when you say them, people know what they mean. It recenters them to the values that they were hired for in the first place. Embrace your inner geek. So Blizzard is kind of like a college campus in the sense that, essentially in the sense that there are tons of almost like student organized groups, except for their employees. There's like mailing lists, like people who get together for board games and minis, people who are like interested in like special interest stuff, like, you know, the state of being a woman at Blizzard, for example, which is a mixed success bag. You know, just ranging across anything. And it doesn't matter what it is that you're passionate about. The important thing is that you embrace it, and you don't just kind of like shelter it from everybody else. Learn and grow. So there's actually this thing called the Blizzard Academy. It's a dedicated part of the campus, and they actually have classrooms there. And seriously, during the day, they have classes that you can attend. And some afterwards for stuff like, you know, live drawing or sculpture and so on. They don't care what your position is in the company. I took a class on using ZBrush. ZBrush never comes up in my job, but I wanted to learn it. So I got to learn ZBrush from a guy who works at Pixar, which was really cool. And the company doesn't bat an eye at this. The point is that they are seriously invested in your growth at the company. They don't want you to become stagnant. And they want you to be able to fight for that, to fight for your right to enrich yourself as an employee of Blizzard. Thus, it gets a value. Oops. Lead responsibly. This relates to conscientious development. This is a good time to bring up that the values are not what Blizzard is, but what Blizzard aspires to be, because this works a lot of the time, but sometimes doesn't. A good example of this would be some of the player feedback that we had when Heroes of the Storm first started being played at BlizzCon. People started noticing in some of the screenshots and from playing the game that the breasts of the characters were kind of balloonish. And it was like the kind of thing that we started getting back from a lot of people, not just women. There was some argument back and forth like, you know, hey, it's a top-down game, so we need to make it clear that they're women, which is not really an argument, by the way. And actually, believe it or not, they actually ended up fixing this problem. It's not a perfect process, but again, these values are aspirational. Dustin Browder, the lead for that team, was actually personally the one who responded to a lot of that feedback. He personally argued against it at first, and then changed his stance when he realized that to lead responsibly would be to do so. Think globally. This is probably the one that people who are not at Blizzard think about the least, and people at Blizzard think about the most, because this is huge. So say you have a country named China, and there is a cultural stigma against having exposed bones in games. Now say that you're releasing a game called Diablo that is about undead, basically, or an expansion called Wrath of the Lich King that is also about a lot of undead. This becomes problematic. Thinking globally means recognizing that as a global player, you're not appeasing your original audience anymore. You have to think on a way bigger scale. And this actually leads to a lot of problems, and is another thing that is also a mixed bag in how we do, but is something that we're constantly looking to improve. It used to be that if you were originally from one country and then you moved to another country, and so like you had regional accounts, say in World of Warcraft, you know, in both of those countries, you used to have to keep 2 copies of the game, like 2 full copies of the game. And if a game-breaking patch came out for one, and remember patches are delayed, so like, you know, they'll prep one region for being able to play the game and like getting all the new content, and then another region is being done after that. There's like rolling patches. If you are in 2 different countries, you get to play the game when both of them are ready. Because although they are 2 separate installs, they do share some files. This is problematic. We got a lot of feedback about it. It was a ton of work, but actually this is improving and has improved. Play nice, play fair. So this is kind of an obvious one, so I'm just going to stick to an anecdote. A buddy of mine who's a designer, he was giving a presentation to some of the higher ups of the company, and during the presentation he was logged into his World of Warcraft character to show something UI related. While he was giving the presentation, I want to say it was Tom Chilton raised his hand and was like, wait a minute, were you that guy who was camping everyone in some apparently choke point, you know, between tiered content? And sure enough, he was. Sure, I mean, this guy like has lived most of his life as kind of an internet troll. So play nice, play fair doesn't necessarily, I mean, it's funny, and you know, it's also frustrating as like a player experience. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're trying to tell you how to interact with people as a gamer. But it does mean that they're trying to remind you of the spirit of games, right? That by agreeing to a certain set of rules, we're hoping that everyone else abides by them, because that's what defines our success when we actually achieve it. Every voice matters. So every time there's an internal build, it gets sent out to everybody of like a new game. If you have feedback, you send it back to the team. You receive emails back, often from the leads or from the designers who worked on it. This is huge for culture at the company. This is why sometimes during the talk I'm probably going to say we, and other times I'm going to say the company, and you know, any number of things, because in my mind it's we, and I have to work against that, you know, because I haven't actually worked on everything, but I feel like I have. So the final bit about this, these values aren't here to be reductive truths that negate all of the argument. What makes them great is that they arm your employees, as I was saying before, with words that everyone else has implicitly agreed upon. And as I said before, it aligns a company and it centers us culturally. When faced with a tough decision about how to handle global issues, we can remind ourselves of our aspiration to think globally. Words are powerful. And relatedly, and sort of a tangent, you can tell a lot about a company's culture by the inside jokes they make. I used to work at EA, and the phrase I heard most often was "ship it," which at times was a smart business move, and at other times was a humorous but sad admission that we weren't going to get what we wanted. I loved my job at EA, by the way, not to knock it down, but that was an aspect of it, right? Like I was working at EA Sports, it's an iterative environment, they had to value things differently. The second most common phrase, by the way, was "it drops right in," usually referring to third-party libraries or integrating another team's code. Spoiler alert, it never drops right in. Or as my boss at EA used to say, "it drops right in, sure, but you never know how far." At Blizzard, the most common phrase I hear is "Blizzard quality." It's also used humorously, like when shit goes completely foobar. And it's also used when you start feeling the pressure of having to live up to a high-quality bar that the company has set prior to you working there. and to shift gears. If I had to give this talk yet another name, this would be it. Yes, it's an Oscar Wilde reference. What I mean by earnest is what Oscar Wilde meant by it. Being honest by being yourself. And that also means doing the things that only you could do. This concept, like culture, runs through everything else that I'm talking about. And it's also yet another secret to Blizzard's success. Notice that once Blizzard picked up stride with all the games we know them for, they've only produced games relevant to their identity. Who here remembers Silicon and Synapse? Okay, cool, one person. That was Blizzard, by the way. That was their original name. They had this like really doofy logo with like a brain with sneakers on it, because it was like super 90s. They made games like Blackthorn, Lost Vikings, Rock and Roll Racing, things that we do associate them sort of with now, but if you think about it, are a complete tone shift from what they started making after that. Even Hearthstone, which is a far and awesome stretch from what you're used to seeing Blizzard make, it still fits. It's still very much a Blizzard game. It was really funny reading and listening to the response to the game when it was first announced at PAX. Like, oh my god, Blizzard's making a card game. Why is there not news about Titan or WoW 2 and so on? And a lot of people were upset that we weren't announcing anything else. The funny thing, though, is that Hearthstone was super successful. A lot of people may have speculated that making a card game spelled out death for the company, particularly for fear that we only cared about the casual side of our player base. But if you've played Hearthstone, it is cutthroat. It may be easy to get into, but it is cutthroat. And when someone does a nice emote, like, well played, they're usually being sarcastic. Despite speculation, Hearthstone is super successful, and I wasn't surprised in the slightest, and no one else at the company was either. The moment I played the first internal build that was sent out, I knew we were going to be okay. Not just because the game was going to be successful, but because the company had managed to evolve by being earnest. Remember the mission statement I showed earlier? The most epic entertainment experiences ever? The company succeeded at making it epic, but most importantly, Blizzard proved that it could do it at a different size, and in Unity. Fun fact. A company with a less established culture might have completely dropped its existing direction in the face of how the industry had changed. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with companies that do. There's value in being mercurial. But Blizzard managed to shift its stance, again, slowly, as Blizzard does, but it did. Similar to how viewing games in the abstract can open up new possibilities for design, a culture based on fundamental, easily applicable values gives you an abstract freedom to manifest them in a completely different direction, in the same way that it can align people from completely different backgrounds at a common basis. Being able to boil down what makes our other games successful into a format no one was expecting is the best example. Again, at this point I'm talking both about culture and about being earnest. This is important for an individual just as much as it is for a community of them. You too can evolve, but generally speaking, my advice to you would be to do so in a way that is honest to who you are. So now I want to talk about the individual side of this equation. My first day at Blizzard felt very much like the day I graduated college. It was awesome and exciting on one hand, and totally deflating and whatever on the other. You go through all this effort, and then you hit what feels like a major up in your life, and it's not like you expect fanfare or something, but still, you finally made it here. Your first day at Blizzard, nothing special in particular happens. You don't get a tour of the campus because you got that during the interview process. You don't get mentored by anyone in the staff because they hire people year-round and people have work to be doing. Getting into Blizzard can seem like a lofty thing on the outside, and when you finally manage to catch the metaphorical train, you remember it's a job and nothing ever was moving that fast in the first place. People basically treat you as if you'd always been there, which isn't necessarily bad. They treat you like it's obvious that you belong. And keep in mind, the company doesn't hire people that it feels meh about. If they hire you, the people you work with, who are the people who interviewed you, are excited to work with you and convinced that you're a top-notch person who just took a really long time to get here. That felt, at least to me, really, really weird. This is where I come from. There's technically a top half, but we don't talk about that. If I was to show you on my hand, I'd point to that blue area over there. I wish I could say I was from Bad Axe, which is right here, but I'm from Grand Rapids. The Wikipedia page of Grand Rapids notes that it's the SpaghettiOs capital of the world. Not because it produces them, but because it eats the most per capita. I personally am proud of my contribution. The other thing that Grand Rapids is known for is that American Pie was filmed there, and in fact based off of East Grand Rapids High School. So, Michigan. Not really into technology, not in a modern sense, more into cars in a holy crap, this industry is falling sense. When I was growing up, there wasn't really a basis for other people doing tech jobs around me. My first programming environment was a black composition notebook because I had read books on programming from the library when I was a kid before I had a computer. So I'd write little programs down and they were all junk. None of them was going to work or anything. But I was just super excited about it. But I had nothing next to me to know where I was, how I was doing. Everyone perceived what I was doing as being essentially arcane. Granted, if I had been born on the east side, you know, that is a little bit more of a tech hub, but where I was, people mostly just worked under the table jobs or were into farming. The tricky thing about growing up in a culture that is different from what you want to pursue is that you never really know where you're standing, you never know what to measure yourself up against, and it's really easy to think that you don't belong. And that's how I felt. I had a 2.8 GPA when I was in high school and when I was an undergraduate. I'm not particularly proud of it, but it happened. And it was kind of on purpose because I really hated doing homework. I grew up thinking that I was a slacker, that I wasn't going to be able to accomplish anything, and pretty much everyone around me was saying kind of the same thing. You know, you need to get your life into gear and all that. I didn't realize it, but I was just born in a place that was different from what was going to help me accelerate and grow. I didn't realize it yet, but I was actually a workaholic. Thank you, Fi, for teaching me that. And so transitioning from undergraduate to FIA was this complete different shift, where suddenly I'm ejected out of being surrounded by no one who's interested in what I'm doing, and now I'm surrounded by everyone who's interested in it. And just like how the people at Blizzard treat you, like of course you belong here, you know, of course you're on the other side now, of course these agreed upon values that games are cool, that, you know, Final Fantasy VI is the best. Actually, you probably don't agree with that, but I do. Just like there's that sudden cultural shift when you find yourself in this new space, you realize how wrong your perspective was prior, you know? I thought that I was going to be super behind every other FIA. I assumed that everyone had tons of games under their belt, and you know, even the designers were like super technical, and I just, you know, I didn't know. And in fact, when I first had my interview with Rick, I kind of geeked out like a lot, because that was the first time I was talking with somebody who was doing anything related to something that I was actually interested in. You know, I had gone through school, and yeah, I had done like student groups and stuff like that. I like did debate, etc. Those things were all cool, but they weren't what I actually wanted to do, what I spent all my time thinking about. And when I got to the other side, it suddenly became obvious, like, oh, okay, so I was just in the wrong place, and I hadn't realized yet that I needed to take steps to move myself to a place that I belonged. When I graduated from FIA, my first job was working at EA Sports. And remember, I am talking about the importance of being earnest, and I'm going to be earnest right now. I don't like sports. I don't like sports games. However, I absolutely loved this job, and it was totally awesome that I went and did this. This was actually at Rick's suggestion, because I wasn't even going to try to apply to EA Sports. The thing that I didn't realize yet was the power of the abstract. When you look at a sports game, what you probably see if you're not a sports fan is this real-life simulation that's like, well, why can't I just go outside and do this? You don't realize what the underlying value is and what it actually is under the hood. I'm going to tell you something that may blow your mind. Sports games are perhaps the most complicated RPGs that exist on the market today. Seriously. I mean, you look at any like basic D20 like RPG turned computer game, and you have about like 6 to 8 stats, usually depending on whether or not they split agility and dexterity and wisdom and intelligence. If you look at a sports game, you're talking about 23 to 32 different stats, all of which not only apply to how your players move and play when you're actually using a controller and playing the game, but also when you're simulating the game, because you can't keep 2 separate stats for these things. You have to make this perfect simulation sandbox that at the end of a simulated season is going to produce scores for all the teams that look realistic. And the reason that you're doing this, again, is the same reason that kinging a piece in chess is cool. Because when you make that simulation that has those hard rules, when you succeed at it, it feels awesome. And when you play with it, it feels real. And what I mean by play with it is that sports games ultimately are a sandbox. For people who like sports, and they want to play, say, for example, Dynasty mode, and they just want to, like, you know, either try and see what happens when they make all their team members really unhappy, right, and just like trade them all away and screw them on contracts, or they want to try and like take their home team and actually have them succeed for once and get into the playoffs. You know, they want to feel like that is possible, but that it's really hard and realistic in order to do it. Because when you've given them these constraints, it adds symbolic value to the experience. And it was when I actually realized that I came to absolutely love sports games and love basketball, because it is really arbitrary sometimes the way contract stuff works. I spent a lot of time on contracts. My job at EA Sports was systems and UI design. So systems design, for those who aren't familiar, is kind of dealing with like these ecosystems of how features play together, how stats work, etc. Right? They're things that you can poke and nudge and, you know, machine of many parts that is going to produce some kind of like output, whether or not it's success of a game or, you know, how your combat rolls or whatever. While I was working at EA Sports, I actually started using some of my FI experience, sort of like ninja-like, outside of my task time, and doing some fundamental navigation prototypes, because I thought that the user experience was pretty crappy. When you first opened up the game while I was working there, and you just were a new player who wanted to get in, you had to press A 13 times to start one game of basketball. Like, that's to go through, like, no, I don't want to sign up for, you know, Xbox Live. No, I don't want to sign up for the EA Online Sports Pass. Like, you know, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to tell you what my name is. I don't want to pick a team name for, you know, the online mode, etc., right? Not just that, but also like the little Dynasty mode itself, which was kind of like my baby. That's where you control a team over the course of many seasons. Like, moving through it was quagmire. And 2K11, which was our biggest competitor at the time, and, you know, still is amazing, their one problem was user experience. Because if you've played that game, it is really, really hard to play that game. It almost feels like the game wants you to impress it rather than the other way around. I was working at EA for about a year when they actually sent me to GDC. And through a mix of circumstances, I ended up talking to a Blizzard employee. I wasn't planning on it. I was planning on leaving EA at the time because we were finishing one cycle of NBA Live, and I knew that another one was coming, and I have this fear of being stagnant, and I was just like, no, I gotta get out, It was really cool, but I gotta go. At the very end of GDC, on the very last day when they were closing up the career fair, I happened to walk by the Blizzard booth section. This story is going to sound kind of fabricated, but I swear to God, if you talk to the people who were there, they will all say that this actually happened. I walked by the booth that Blizzard had set up, and there was this huge line going up to it of people with like tablets and laptops to show their work, to try and get feedback and try and talk to someone from Blizzard. While I was standing there and just kind of like people watching, because I can be awkward at times when no one's looking, or at least I think no one's looking. While I was standing there, a guy walked up to me, and he had a Blizzard shirt on, and he was like, "Have you been helped?" And I was like, "No." And so he turned like on his heels and just started like walking away. I assumed what he meant or was implying was that he was going to help me, and so that I should follow him. So I did. And what he did was he actually walked like into the Blizzard employee only section of the booth and just started like chit-chatting one of the software engineers. So I was just standing there behind him feeling super awkward, like I don't want to start like backstepping, you know, and I don't want to like tap him on the shoulder, but this guy's just having a conversation and I'm pretty sure I'm not supposed to be here. And at some point, the software engineer he was talking to kind of like peered over, looked at me, and was like, "Are you supposed to be here?" Because I obviously looked like I did not. Like, I mean, I had my EA Sports shirt on and everything. And he actually ended up talking with me. Talked with me about my job a little bit at EA. Interestingly though, what he actually was more interested in was not so much my job, but what I did outside of my job. It was almost like he assumed that because I was working at EA Sports, like, all right, so this guy has some amount of skills, what he actually wanted to know, and what I didn't realize at the time, was whether or not I was going to be a cultural fit for the company. What he started talking with me about was, what do you do when you're not at your job? Which the answer at the time was, well, I teach undergraduate and I work in an indie game. Very convenient that I was doing both of those things at the time because it sounded really nice, but it was really a lot of time and stressful, but a cool experience. I told him about these things, and that actually was what he teased out the most. At the end, he started asking me some details, and he was really interested in the fact that I had built prototypes while I was at EA. And he was really surprised because he's like, wait a minute, you're a designer, but you know how to program? Which blew my mind because, I mean, technical design isn't a completely new thing, but remember, Blizzard moves slow. So I seemed like a unicorn to him. And he actually called over the technical director of Battle.net and was like, hey, you should talk with this guy. And so I did. And his name is Brian Fitzgerald, and he kind of looks like our Brian here, except for he has like crazy, like super spiked up green hair, which I can actually picture our Brian having too. So I talked with Brian Fitzgerald for a while, and he was kind of crazy, but really awesome. And he did the same thing. He didn't seem to care about my job. He didn't seem to care about like what the literal talent experience that I had was. What he was really interested in, again, was whether or not I would actually be a cultural fit for the company. And so at the end of the conversation, he said this thing that blew my mind. He was like, you should come in for an interview. Go tell that HR lady over there that you have one. Which was awesome. So I went and did it, and she didn't believe me. And I had to actually like wave him down and be like, no, seriously, tell her, because she doesn't believe me. Makes sense. I don't want anyone to be able to come up and be like, hey, I have an interview at Blizzard, please schedule me. And yeah, so I had one. I was actually brought in originally to be interviewed as a software engineer. It's about time to change. I was actually originally brought in to be a software engineer, and so I went through the programming test, and which I can't talk about obviously, and I went through an interview process, which I also can't talk too much about. And at the end of it, they liked me, but instead of telling me that they liked me, they actually sent me a rejection letter. Yeah, seriously. I got the rejection letter like that week too. So I was kind of bummed out. I was like, oh man, that's the end of this thread. And then the weirdest thing happened when the creative director of Battle.net called me a couple weeks after that. And he started the conversation with the one question I was never, ever going to be prepped to answer in an interview. Because it was an interview that I wasn't ready for. The question was, if you were here, what would you do? Try answering that. I was like, so, well, what does Battle.net do? And he couldn't tell me, obviously, because they were working on stuff that wasn't out yet. Have you, I assume some of you play Blizzard games? There's this thing called the Battle.net desktop app now. It's basically like Steam, but cooler, and Blizzard only. They were working on that, and he couldn't say it, you know, and he couldn't even like kind of like talk around it. So I had to like basically answer this question in a vacuum. And he wanted to work with me. It wasn't like if you fail this question, you're not going to be hired. I didn't realize it at the time, but that's what he was getting at. What had happened at the interview prior was that they decided that they wanted Chris Darin, but they didn't necessarily want Chris Darin as a software engineer. I had done fine in the interview and test, or so they told me. They may be nice. But they were worried that doing something that only applied to a portion of my skill set would not actually make me happy and stay at the company, which they really care about. It kind of has a familial sort of feeling. So in trying to answer the question, I remembered something. I remembered how there had been a few times where we were unsure about design at EA, and to surprise of others, I'd whip up a prototype and start measuring things, how different features compared and so on. You know, as a designer at FIA, you tend to learn really quick how to just find stuff to do. It's sink or swim, and people don't like it if it looks like you're twiddling your thumbs. And of course, you get lots of prototyping experience as a result. So really, me making prototypes at EA wasn't surprising. It was just me being earnest. In lapses between having a lot of work, I invented some. So that's what I told the creative director of my kind, that if I was on his team, I would make prototypes. And I explained what that meant and how it could fit into their existing pipeline. I had a feeling that he wouldn't be too familiar with them as part of the development process. Blizzard, again, is kind of known for taking a long time. Internally, by the way, the joke is that we move at a glacial pace, haha. And I was right. They didn't have any technical designers in his whole department. And prototyping in general was something they were only sort of acquainted with in like a distant way, like they heard that phone companies did it. But they hadn't actually like engaged with in a real sort of like process sense. All of this was fine. So all of this phone conversation was fine, but if you think about it, all of it was retrofitted. As I said, they already knew that they wanted to hire me for my practically for my GDC conversation alone. They just weren't telling me that. It wouldn't have been the same if they had. Interviewing with them was essentially only confirming this fact, that there was some place in the company that I could fit, where I could belong. I didn't get offered an interview because I seemed bright. I was offered one because when I described what I did, it became clear that I was of similar mind to the company. This is an important point. Blizzard hires for cultural fits more than it hires for talent fits. You can raise someone's skills. That's what the Blizzard Academy is for. But you can't make someone not an asshole, at least not without a whole lot of effort. Blizzard has a very artisan culture. They really care about people who care about things, and it doesn't have to be that video games are your only interest. One of the most popular groups at Blizzard is the Filmmakers Group, and they get together and they make films. The second most popular group is the Bands Group, and they get together and they play music. In fact, some of you may have heard that at BlizzCon, the CEO, Mike Morheim, actually plays in a band called Elite Tauren Chieftain. Some of the other leads, people who've been there for a long time, they play metal. It's pretty good. Ultimately, though, this is not a talk about me being awesome or my posture when faced with any of these things or anything like that. In fact, what I'm trying to tell you is to make the opposite point. This only seems interesting, getting back to the beginning, because you're on the outside and you don't have all the mundane interstitial details. I talked about working on games from an early age, but I didn't talk about how I mostly slacked off and procrastinated like anybody else, like you probably have to deal with. The same could be said about Blizzard. It seems awesome because you're not required to wake up every morning and work there. You don't see the mundane side of it. And don't get me wrong, Blizzard is still awesome. And I'd like to think that I'm pretty okay too. But the fact of the matter is that it's a company. It's fallible. And things slip through the cracks, and it's up to the people who work there to try and catch some of those things. The truth of the matter is a weird mixture of being both totally mundane and fallible and being awesome. Which brings me to my next and final point. If I had to give this talk one last final name, this would be it. Poise is not choosing what comes easiest, but maintaining a posture that's often difficult. It's not accepting criticism too harshly or soaring at every bit of praise you receive. Poise is super important. It's like a stance you take that reflects in your actions. Poise is what gets the company to follow its values and not just state them. It lets the company love and celebrate its work, as many of them were once fans of the company, while not becoming blind to its negative qualities. Poise is admitting that the D3 auction house was a really bad idea, and going through the lengthy but necessary process of removing it and retuning an entire game just to release a truly epic expansion. That is committing to quality. And Poise is also recognizing that just because everyone says some class or another is OP doesn't mean you have to chase your tail trying to rebalance the numbers to make everybody happy. This part of the talk, though, is not so much about the company, since I've already gone over all of that. I actually want to start talking about you. Take this example. If the only thing you ever talk about with someone is the weather, it kind of suggests that there's not much else you want to talk to them about. It's the same thing if you get an interview or a one-on-one conversation with a Blizzard employee at a conference. If all you talk with them is about how much you love their games, even if you keep insisting that you're passionate about working on them, it sounds like there's nothing else that you really have to say. When you're talking to a company you want to work for, you want to make them picture you already there. You want to demonstrate that you provide a lot of value. Talk at a deep level about the specific thoughts you have. Don't be afraid to criticize, and absolutely don't be afraid to tell them if you don't even like their games. Again, I didn't like sports games. That totally came up in my EA interview. When they asked me what my favorite sports game was, I said Tecmo Football. That was the honest answer. When I was interviewed at Blizzard, they asked me what my favorite Blizzard games were. I said Warcraft II and Diablo 1. Not the most popular answers, but I had reasons, and I talked about them. You know, it's not that I didn't like the games that they produced after that, but that those games were a special place in my heart, you know, and I went at length about it. You know, they had this tone of like almost like old school fairy tales where the world is like inherently dark and it's really just out to get you, and you got to do whatever you can. And that was cool because, again, they're not looking for literal qualities. They're looking for these abstract, more fundamental ones, things that fit this idea of you belonging to this artisan culture. You have to keep your posture because when you do that, it suggests that all the basic stuff is already covered, that you're talented, that you're passionate, and so on. If you demonstrate that you're passionate about working there by not spending all your time literally saying it, that's going to go a lot further. Another example. I've been doing a lot of interviews this past year, and it seems like every person we end up turning down falls on the same question. The big one always goes something like this. Describe an experience of failure you've had at a past job and what you'd do differently. Answers to this question fall into a few camps. Most people will not come up with anything that sounds like meaningful failure. Similar to how sometimes when people are asked what their biggest weakness is, their answer is that they care too much, not a weakness. I mean, it can be a weakness in some ways, but it suggests that you don't have anything else more meaningful to say. Some people, when answering the question, will throw everyone else in the project under the bus. They'll let the blame slide right off them. The buck stops there, that type of person. The poised answer, however, is a mixture of a lot of things. It's answering with a real struggle that you've actually gone through, what you've learned from it, what some of the factors were that were out of your control, because it's okay to admit them as long as you aren't blaming them, and so on. It's a mixture, and everything is balanced in a healthy amount. That's poised. There's a reward to all this hard work, though. To pursuing companies and having to go through this struggle of trying to prove that they actually should give you money to work there, that you actually belong. So I want to end this talk in a more celebratory note. I told you I'd show you a bigger picture of Blizzard Campus. The building you saw earlier is actually like down here, so it's outside of the photo. That's the central building where World of Warcraft, Team 1 World of Warcraft is. This over here is where like Battle at the Cafeteria is, and then there's like sound and cinematics, and they actually have some other buildings across the street now because we ran out of parking, so Blizzard's solution was to buy another building. True story. That right there is the orc statue that I showed you earlier, and you can see that everyone's sort of gathering around it because this is an event. Events actually take place quite often at Blizzard. This one in particular was a Hearthstone champagne toast. Every time a game is launched, there's a champagne toast. And it's not just the team that celebrates, it's the whole company that celebrates. Like, seriously, almost in equal parts. There's sort of a ritual here. There's a bunch of flagpoles. You can kind of see, yeah, you can see them. No, actually you can't. I lied. There's these flagpoles and it has flags for all the games, and when a new one comes up, the oldest one gets taken down and they put the new one up. That's Mike Morheim, the CEO. You may notice at this point that there are a lot of champagne bottles. You may be wondering what we do with those champagne bottles. This was the answer. I've heard stories actually that when the World of Warcraft champagne toast happened, they had 4 times the number of champagne bottles, and it killed off most of the grass. It seriously rains champagne. This also happens. Everyone smells like homeless people the entire day. They actually warn you a week in advance, like bring an extra pair of clothes. Only half the people remember to do it. And then, of course, this happens. When you get on the inside, everything seems mundane, and the little events like this actually go a long way. These are the things that you fixate on, not the awesomeness of the games or the epicness of the company. It's having landed in a culture that actually cares about things that you also care about, namely committing to making a quality product. The values that align us and bring us together, we gather around to celebrate our successes as a whole company. As I said, I'm often saying we when I talk about it. They really do make you feel that way. The last thing that I want to say is that the purpose of this talk, again, was not only to change your perspective, but also just to make you think. I don't want to give you too much specific advice. I just want to give you some thoughts to mull over and go away with. Because the fact of the matter is, maybe you don't belong at this company. Maybe this isn't actually what you want. Or, any number of factors. You should really look for a place that fits your values, that seems to represent things that you actually care about, and that are going to be meaningful in the day-to-day, such that when you actually work there, the actual place itself just kind of fades into the background, and what you want to show in a presentation like this is a picture of an ice cream social. All I can say at this point is go forth, and I hope you recognize the importance of culture, earnestness, and place. And at this point, open discussion, questions. What would you like to know? Yo.
So you're the first UX prototyper in Blizzard. Obviously, they've been around a while. So, A, how do you approach that? Like, you're the first person at this company who's been around a while and made super awesome games that I'm sure we've all played. And you have this role to make their user experience even better, which in a lot of games hasn't been great. You know, like, I feel like they kind of overstep that to make sure the game plays awesome. And that's a good thing. Obviously, like I can put aside a bad menu once I get into a game and it's super good. But like, so what do you, like, how do you approach that role?
Yeah, that's a great question. Particularly because what it ends up becoming is telling people that their user experience is bad, which is difficult to tell someone who's working on a game that has made way more money than you're ever going to make for anybody. The easiest way is to find things that you both already agree upon. So the core values are an obvious one. Another obvious one is, that's kind of why user research is so important, like bringing actual people in, because we record people when they're actually, when they're actually interacting with the software, and we show the developers. Sometimes they don't want to see it. Sometimes it keeps canceling the meetings because they got other stuff to do. Because remember, gameplay first, right? Like sometimes values can aspire you in directions that seem a little bit confused or mix your values. But persistence is the second part, so finding things you agree upon, being persistent about it, and recognizing that you're not going to win every battle, but fighting all of them.
Very cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? I think that's it then. Well, were you, yeah.
Being the only UX prototyper, do you anticipate more coming in at Blizzard? Like, do you think there's going to be more of you? Are they going to be looking for more people to help out with the interface like this? And how do you feel being the only one getting to teach them, getting to train them, getting to take them from the initial pull forward?
Yeah. At times, so when I was in the interview process, they actually asked me that question as well. They were like, are you sure you're going to be happy doing this? Because this might be, a little bit intense. Like the interview actually was partially defining what my job was going to be, because I was kind of pitching it to them. And it was more of a discussion. Let me put it like this. As I said before, the game industry has been changing a lot. Mobile games are becoming huge. It's not just PCs anymore. Macs, have a huge stake in the market in general, maybe not so much in games, but in general. People expect different things from games. If you go back and play Diablo 1 and you haven't played it in a while, you'll probably find it absolutely unplayable. So when you show people these things, they kind of start to recognize, oh yeah, user experience is actually becoming important. Maybe we just haven't hired that many people to do it. There are UX designers at the company. So I'm just another part of this process, but trying to give them, because they've been fighting the fight for a longer time, but they, if you only have wireframes and designs and opinions and data, it's sometimes hard to get people who are more old school gut designers to really buy into it, Not in the same way that if you hand them something that they can actually use and they can click around and be like, oh yeah, this is way better, right? So I would say that all that has actually been super successful. There hasn't been, I was worried at first that when I got into the company that I was gonna have to keep proving that I was worth giving money to. I kept thinking oh man, they're just gonna fire me at any moment now. They're like, man, this isn't working, you need to go home. But no, in fact, I've been, I've actually had the opportunity to work on all the titles that we've come out with since I started the company, except for D3 console. And it's just been kind of like snowballing. So I can't actually answer the question of are we going to hire more, but I can say that you may be able to infer the answer to that question based on how I've already answered it. Yep.
How does your time between the different titles, you mentioned you've worked on all of them except for the D3 console, like how does that play out? Do you just approach any of them at any time, at your whim, or?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's been very much a mixed bag. In the beginning, it was a lot of that, and that didn't go super successfully because, people, when you try to get developers, for the Vines who are here, think of like when Todd is like, hey guys, get your marketing stuff ready for your capstone and stuff like that, or like you guys should be putting out videos about the games you're producing. Like it's really hard to like get yourself off of the track of like making a game to thinking about stuff that is super important and perhaps equally as valuable for actually having a successful game, and committing the proper time to that, right? Totally lost my train of thought.
How does your time go between titles?
Thank you. Yeah. So in the beginning, it was a lot of me like reaching out and then doing stuff for the Battle.net desktop app, because that was kind of like homebrewed, so it was easy to get started on that. And then as I started like building stuff, other teams started seeing the stuff that I was building, and you got to keep up with the Joneses. Like, hey, where are our prototypes? Like, come on, man, what are you doing? And so at this point, it's actually like I kind of don't have enough time for all the stuff that keeps coming up, which has been really nice. More nice than stressful. Does that answer?
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any concrete example you can give us of where you've had influence on the user experience in any of these games, compared to where it was and where it is now, as a result of you tinkering with it?
I hate to say this, but the answer is pretty much no. The majority of the things that I've worked on are not going to be, you're not going to see for a long time. I can say that, even stuff, if you open up the Battle.net desktop app, for example, I mentioned I did prototypes for it, but the prototypes that I did, only parts of them were actually implemented in this sort of stage of it, and the rest of it is kind of planned for much further. So there's actually not any one thing that I can point at and be like, yeah, all of this is me, except for the one time when we were stretched on programmers and I helped, I made one of the settings screens. Because they just needed someone to help out with that. But that wasn't a user experience thing, that was just a job thing.
Very cool.
Let me get her back there and then I'll get you.
What's your average day like, and how much time do you spend sitting in meetings versus sitting at your desk working?
You had to ask that question. It varies a lot. So I have this weird position of I belong in every meeting. So, and the reason for that is because if the designers are meeting about how something theoretically should go, or the things that we need to do, looking at the future of the feature, or the programmers are meeting talking about the technical implications of something that they're going to build, I belong in both of those things. And when it comes to I'm doing a lot of prototypes all the time, and so then I have to review those with people, not just the people who are sort of the stakeholders, the ones who have the buy-in at the end to say yeah, this is great, but I also have to show it to my peers. And so for me personally, I spend a lot of time in meetings. But the time outside of that is very much heads down. I have wireless headphones that are noise canceling. I tell people to not speak up on me or interrupt me while I'm doing my work, and I just pound at it. So yeah, I would say though that my answers to questions about my personal experience are not going to be necessarily relevant for everyone else at the company, because I'm in kind of a weird, unique position. I'm trying to simmer down the number of meetings, and so, but that's just a personal thing.
Yeah, you had mentioned the Blizzard Academy, and that sounded really, really awesome. But now, you did say, are some of the classes during core work hours?
Yeah,
people just get up and go?
I learned ZBrush it was for 2 weeks. My hour and a half right prior to lunch was accounted for, which was amazing, because that's when I'm least interested in doing work. That's when I want to drink coffee and regret that I woke up in the morning.
Was that paid time then? Am I allowed to ask that?
Yeah, absolutely. No,
Okay.
no, no. And
That's awesome.
so yeah, so this type, generally speaking, like this type of information is stuff that you get if you like went on a tour. And so it's not like super secret. It's not like the secret sauce. One thing that I would say is that if you've seen presentations from people from other companies that make a lot of money, when they talk about the perks of the company, you'll probably notice that a lot of them are like, we go on these company trips, or like we do, like these big sort of like glamorous things. Our cafeteria is, super fancy. We have like personal chefs, Zynga. And those things are all cool, and it's just like a different direction for like how you're trying to attract an employee base. In the case of like Blizzard, it's sort of like familial. It's about like, they want to really invest in people in the long run. And honestly, like there have been people who've taken classes outside of their discipline who've actually switched tracks while working at the company, which is pretty crazy. When they first told me about that, I was like, whatever. The Academy is great, and not only do they do that, but they also bring in like guest lecturers from like all over the place. Scott McCloud, the guy who writes about comics, he came in and did like a huge talk. We had one of the people who was like one of the core engineers on the like Mars rover come in and talk about it. Like just all kinds of stuff like that. And again, this is during company hours, and your manager isn't like, hey, now why are you going to this stuff? They're like, awesome, I'm gonna be there too. So I would say that like, for how they spend or invest on their employees, for me personally, I find it wiser. It may be a little bit less and a little bit less glamorous, but it's stuff that actually makes me want to stay there because I see value in this, Yeah.
With so much work that Blizzard is doing, and of course with how widespread you have to be in all of the how much time do you think you would say you get for kind of personal projects? Like you said, you worked on some indie games of your own before, and then like the Academy going out and just learning ZBrush because we want to learn ZBrush.
Yeah.
How does that exactly fit into your extremely tight schedule?
Yeah. So, well, my indie projects are obviously like the post hours of my employment. So partially this question is like how many hours do I work? And I will say that it is a very stable job because when things are going, if things are going bad and they're not going to hit a deadline, their answer isn't like, let's all crunch for this. Their answer is, we're always late, whatever. Push it back. People will complain, but again, they won't remember if it's late, they'll remember if it's great, etc. So, my work week, my overtime is all entirely voluntary, and it's happened because usually it's because I'm working on this prototype and I'm really interested in it, but there's this other prototype that's way cooler, that's the next one on the pipe, and so it's like, I want to get this one done real quick. But outside of that, Blizzard has this really awesome policy for doing side projects. A lot of bigger companies do because it's kind of necessary nowadays. And so, yeah, I mean, where I find the time is I cannibalize all the time that I should be sleeping. We're playing video games. I pretty much only play games that it's like League of Legends, so I can just do a match and walk away from it. And otherwise spend my time working on development stuff and so on. Hi. Again.
Yeah. If you play your own games, Blizzard games in general, and you come across a bug or anything, is it pretty easy to report it to someone within the company and just getting fixed?
Not only is it easy, people get really annoyed when you just turn to them and complain about the bug. Seriously, and that surprised me the first time because, I found a bug. I just wanted to joke about it, Mystery Science Theater style. Look at this weird thing, And then the person sitting next to me is like, no, submit that. No, seriously, here's the form, submit that, send them an email, take screenshots. Producers, why do you gotta make me do work? Was a producer, obviously. But yeah, not just bugs, but also your feelings about how it's going or things you really care about. When stuff, say for example, Heroes of the Storm is getting a lot of traction. People are becoming really interested in it. They're thinking about how they're going to make more skins that really appeal to people. What do? Well, they send out a mass email to the whole company, being like, hey, what do you think we should do? and they solicit responses from people. They actually respond to quite a few of them, except for the ones that are like totally out of the blue. But you know, everyone just kind of errs on the side of like taking your opinion seriously, even if that isn't your job. Like if you're making a design criticism and you're not a designer, as long as you're generally like polite about it and like thoughtful in what you say, like, you know, they take that seriously. And so, you know, bugs or whatever, all of that, same thing. They don't care if everyone else is reporting the bug. There's already a system in place for like catching similar bugs and like, you know, putting them together. A lot of companies do this. So what they really care about is making sure that they have that net as like, you know, tight as they can, so they, you know, catch all this feedback. Part of the point of like hiring an entire company, like from, you know, everyone, like regardless of whether or not they're a developer, and knowing that they fit some kind of like abstract cultural cornerstone. Part of the benefit of that is that you can rely on them for stuff like feedback, you know, because there's a certain bar that you know that everyone has hit, that they belong here essentially. You got another one? Sure.
Let's
Okay.
take one
I
or
don't
two more
see-
questions at the
okay.
most. We'll just do one or two.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, it is in there. All right. Do you guys keep track of your time and like what programs do you guys do, or like who do you report to and stuff?
That I can't answer. Sorry.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, we keep track of our time, yeah, but I can't answer that question, unfortunately. I also can't speak for the whole company because every company, or every team of the company is like its own like mothership, you know? They really have everything that they need. They have their own process. So like, you know, if you go to like Perforce's website, Perforce is like used by Blizzard. And if you go to like a competitor's website and they also say used by Blizzard, it's because it's all true. You know, it just depends on team. So, is that it?
All right, let's give Chris another round of applause.